We okay? Oh, yeah, I can see the message. Thank you, Margaret. So good evening again, and thank you very much for finding the time to join us for this autumn term briefing for chairs and vice chairs of governors at the start of this new academic year. As I said, we've already got 30 odd people and a number of other people who will be waiting for the recording. You'll know that we're recording these meetings now. We started this last year to make them available to anyone who can't attend tonight, but also as a source of information for yourselves after the meeting, if you want to refer back to anything you've heard at a later date. We do appreciate you attending. In that it will help you to understand the contents of the autumn term governing body meetings, as well as hearing from the speakers that we've got here with you tonight. So I'm delighted to welcome David Street, our Director of Education, SEND and Skills, as well as Dave Cookson, the Head of School Improvement. And a little bit later on, you'll be hearing from one of our team of governance and data protection officers, Margaret Arksey, who many of you will know, who will be taking you through the autumn term governing body meeting. And in addition to Margaret, I'm delighted to say that we've also got other members of the governance team here with us tonight. I'm sure many of you will know that Vicky Evans, the governance team manager, is currently on maternity leave following the birth of her beautiful daughter Ella in the summer term. And I really would just like to take this opportunity to thank the team for their support and their guidance and their expertise. I'm certainly relying on them. But they're coping really well with added roles, responsibilities. They've all got additional schools during Vicky's absence, and I'd just like to thank them for that at the start of the meeting tonight. But without further ado, I'm going to welcome and hand you over to David Street for him to share some thoughts with you tonight. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Damien, and welcome and hello to everybody. I do know quite a lot of you already, but for those who don't, my name's David Street. I'm the Director of Education, SEND and Skills for Northumberland County Council. I've worked with a lot of you prior to that in other roles within the council, Head of School Improvement and so on. I've visited a lot of your schools and will continue to do so in the near to long future, I hope. I'm not going to take up a huge amount of your time this evening. You've got a couple of important things on the agenda, but I just wanted to share with you a little piece of work that I've been doing in the recent past. Since I took on the post of director, not that long ago, actually, just back in at the start of May, one of my initial sort of highlights or directions was to do some work with schools about workload and welfare. My summer term briefing did have a section on workload and welfare, and I'm continuing that theme now, and actually probably will continue with that theme in many more briefings to come. Particularly though, and particularly of interest, I think, to chairs and vice chairs, is the sort of work that we can do to support some of the most important people in our schools, who are the school leaders. So head teachers in particular, but also it could be other school leaders. In that, unless they are well and operating at their best, the schools themselves will struggle to do well and operate at their best. I do think that one of the key elements, if not the key element of successful schools, is that they've got successful leaders. Some of you will be at schools large enough to have a leadership team, and some of you will be at really small schools, and leadership's a particular challenge in those cases sometimes, and with all the competing demands on head teachers and leaders' times. The piece of work that I'm referring to earlier is something that I actually visited a series of head teachers across the summer term last year, particularly to ask them about strategies that they used to manage their workload and to support their welfare. Almost all the heads that I did speak to through that period of time, loads of different types of schools, from our very largest schools to some of our very smallest schools, they all had some strategies to support their workload and welfare, but actually they also all admitted to struggling with getting the balance right. And at times some of them said that at times they were exhausted, And that some of them even went on to say, and you know what, there are some days when I don't perform in school as well as I'd like to, as well as they'd want to, which it was good that they were honest, and open and transparent, in the discussions that we had. But also, I think, if that is the scenario, you might recognise it in some of your leaders. But actually, I do think that governors and chairs in particular, have a very specific and distinct role in supporting the workload and welfare, of their head teachers. I didn't complete a scientific study. I just went and asked them to tell me about the strategies that they used, and they quite freely shared them. I recorded them and summarised their actions, if you like. The some of the elements that I've summarised were said by just one person and some by many. And really, I'm just here to share some of those thoughts with you, and trigger some thoughts within yourselves. Some of the strategies would be useful right across the board, and some of the strategies might be useful for some heads in some circumstances at some times. But I've got a little bit of presentation just to chat through. Hopefully, like I said, it won't take more than about 10 minutes, I don't think. Just to keep this thought process, is to keep this area of action at the forefront of your mind. So just bear with me for 2 seconds while I fire up. Okay, we should have the first slide. Damien, I can still see you. If you can see the first slide, brilliant. That's great. Thank you very much. So the summary of the comments made by the head teachers that I interviewed fits into 3 different sections. One of them's about time management strategies. I've got a couple of slides on that. One of them's about managing pressure points, and I've got a couple of slides on that. And one of them's about working together and support partnership work. I've got just one slide on that one. So I'll just dive through them, and like I said, if it leads to any comments or questions for later on, please feel free to note them down and ask me at the end if that's okay. So time management strategies, really this is about planning the work schedule for the head teacher. And although many head teachers have a plan when they set off, some of them did say that they did struggle to stick to a timetable that's suitable. And when they did stick to it, though, they did see the benefits. So my suggestion, and these comments are for head teachers, but again for you to consider, that ideally at the start of the year, now's a great time to do it, is for the head teacher to sit down, maybe with a colleague or maybe just with themselves, and try and split out their day-to-day activities and their development activities. The day-to-day stuff is the things that they sort of can't get away from, and the quite emergent at the moment pieces of work. And the development activities is things that they would like to work on as the year progresses. It could be a school improvement area. It might not be vital that they work on it today, but it might be vital for the school overall that they work on it at some point in time in the near future. The first job that those head teachers that are successful with managing their time said is when they've looked at the development activities in particular and prioritised them, they were able to possibly in some cases share them out between others. So if it was a development activity which has literacy based, it was an English strategy, then they might look to the lead teacher for English in order to support them with that. That sounds a really basic thing, a straightforward thing to do, but actually there are a number of head teachers, and you might recognise them in your own school, who try to keep all the development activities close to themselves, and actually through not sharing those activities, 2 things happen. They overload themselves, and actually they could be empowering colleagues to take on a bit more responsibility and take on a leadership area, and they're not encouraging that by their actions. Once they've worked out what they themselves need to do on their day-to-day and what the development activities are for the school, and shared out those where humanly possible to other members of staff or possibly to governors as well. The next job will be to set a timeline for completion, and being realistic. I do, as my school improvement role in the past, have often seen lots of very well-meaning school improvement plans where all the actions are targeted at the autumn term. And it's because the school wants to get going, they want to get things developed, they want to do things as quickly as possible. But actually, they almost immediately at that planning stage build in an area of failure because it's not realistic to complete all those actions in the first term. And even though they might be important actions, it is important that to try and balance them out over the full year, or even a development plan that's going to be 2 or 3 years in length, and some of those priorities may be moved on, or maybe the completion of some of those priorities might be moved on to a later date. Once the year plan, I'm suggesting a year plan because that's what some of the head teachers said worked for them in terms of the development activities. It's also setting out those fixed events during the week. For many head teachers, it'll be their teaching timetable, set assemblies, etc., activities where they're maybe leading staff development, and put them in and put them down. The plan would be to look for a gap so that we've still got some gaps built in so we can complete the day-to-day and also complete those development activities and put the development activities into the gaps where they are. This is, again, possible for almost every head teacher to do. The trick is about them actually sticking to it. And those head teachers who said they've managed this and managed to make it work were those who said that they had to be quite strict with themselves a lot of the time to ensure that they did stick to the activity that they'd set and didn't allow themselves to be distracted. That can be a challenge, particularly when if there are some unforeseen events come up during the school day. Something that head teachers definitely need support with, and recognise in their feedback to me that they need support in, is considering a work and non-work balance. I've said that the reason that I'm particularly interested in the welfare of the head teachers is that it supports the smooth running and the high performance of the school. But actually, if the high performance of the school is at the detriment to the head teacher, i.e. they're working 14-hour days, they're working 7 days a week, then there has to be questions asked of us all. In the short term, that might add to the benefit of the school, but in the long term, that's never going to be sustainable. And actually, one of the most challenging things for any school to overcome is if the head teacher's off. And therefore, overworking and not getting the non-work balance right is ultimately, in my view, at the detriment to the school. And I am asking for you to support your head teachers at the moment, because at that moment in time, they might not recognise that. And so we are doing our schools a favour, and we are supporting the development of our schools if we can help head teachers set some parameters around evening working, and if they can set some parameters about weekends. I did say to some head teachers that one of the things that might be a great target for them is to actually get to a position where maybe not every weekend, but the majority of weekends are work-free, that they actually finish at a reasonable time on a Friday and then pick up their work again at a reasonable time on a Monday morning. If that could be a target for one of your schools, that would be brilliant. I'm not saying it's always going to be achievable, but actually, if we don't aim for that, we've got almost no chance of hitting it. Sharing the time management strategies with the school improvement partner and with the chair of governors and getting support in that. Can we allow our head teachers to set a programme which allows them an appropriate work-life balance? Can we support them with that? And actually, the other thing is sharing it with staff. I think sometimes, not intentionally, but sometimes staff do think that the head teacher's bulletproof. You know, the head teacher will try and demonstrate that on a daily basis, but that they can do anything, that they can manage anything, that they can cope with all the challenges, and that you know, not let anything slip. And though that is an important role to build confidence in themselves from their staffing bodies, I think also an element of transparency, trust, and support. The head teacher is probably the big, not the only, but one of the main role models within school. And if they're role modeling 14 hours a day, if they're role modeling 7 days a week work, then they're actually role modeling poor practice for others within their school. At that point in time, being very focused and getting jobs done can be really important for head teachers, but actually, can we support them in some of these tricky decisions? Because it is tricky to be rigorous around some of these strategies, but in the end, head teachers tell me these are to the benefit of the school. Second area is about managing pressure points, and this is really all about what happens before the pressure points arise. So if you are firefighting, and a lot of firefighting does exist in schools and outside of schools as well, if we're going to be able to firefight successfully and be able to manage those additional pressures, I think the main point of these points is that we need to be well prepared beforehand. And it's all about the policy that's been developed beforehand, so that when the emergency strikes, if it is an emergency, or the high pressure situation strikes, we've got something to fall back on. Safeguarding is probably the best example. Can come completely out of the blue. Some really significant and serious actions need to be taken and decisions need to be made. But actually, at that point in time, we'll only be able to manage that in a reasonable way if we've got the most appropriate safeguarding policies in place and the most appropriate training has taken place, both for the head teacher and for the members of staff at the school. Smaller schools, these can be continual difficulties if folk are being pulled away from teaching responsibilities into safeguarding challenges and looking at backfill and so on and so forth in order to keep the school moving smoothly. But actually being in partnership with some other schools might be a policy that's already been arranged, which might enable some of those immediacies of response to be either shared or just building extra capacity and thinking time to enable those decisions to be made in less of a pressured way. Still will be pressured, of course, safeguarding challenges always are, but maybe best managed would be to do so by having that policy, practice and training already in place. Parental complaints. It is a growing factor and a growing influence on head teachers. It'll be a growing influence on your workloads as governors. Many of you will be dealing with parental complaints. Sometimes they're justified, sometimes they're not. There are complaints coming to local authority on a daily basis. Sometimes they're justified, sometimes they're not. How do we all collectively manage this pressure is to be planned for them beforehand. That we've got a complaints policy which is appropriate and that we know what it says within it, that we take the steps effectively within it, particularly those informal steps, to try and cut off formal complaints before they become formal complaints. And to make sure that we stick to our own policies, follow them in the timescales we've set, not necessarily the timescale the parent sets, but these are timescales that we set beforehand. And when a parent makes a complaint, we can inform them of the timescale that they can expect, so that they're not chasing every day and adding to further pressures within the school. And also by following our own complaints policies to the letter and within those timescales, it does mean that we will be able to identify those persistent or vexatious complainers, be able to identify them within our own policy, and then take other steps to deal with them without having to be what some can sometimes feel to some head teachers, that they're at the beck and call of vexatious complainers day in, day out, which can cause a lot of pressure on them. Couple more points for pressure points, some slightly different aspects to it, but creating space. Again, we'll need to encourage our head teachers to do this. Some of them do it successfully, some of them don't. But actually, when the firefighting time takes time, when that overflows and it means that maybe some pointers from the development plans are not being covered, or some of the day-to-day activity is not being covered as well as they would wish, I think we do need to get to a position where we encourage the head teachers to use backfill, supply cover or other staff to fill in some of those responsibilities. If this is happening continuously, week in, week out, then maybe it might be something we need to look at again. But the worry is that the head teacher spends a morning dealing with a safeguarding issue and then spends all night catching up on the work that they would have done during the morning, and then return to school the next day not fully rested. And that's okay occasionally, I suppose, or possible to be managed, but day after day after day becomes completely unmanageable. So again, a strategy which head teachers mentioned to me is that they've, even though in times of tight budget, which we're all in continuously, I'm not saying we're not, but where they've got other staff members or governors who say, I recognise you're spending a lot of time with this. You won't have enough time, therefore, to complete some of your other activities. So we're going to, for a period of time, get in a supply teacher to cover those sessions, get another member of staff to take the leadership role in that particular area, and so on, again, to just balance out between everybody. Everybody's working really hard, but to balance that out. There are some other times when possibly external demands all turn up at the same time. Ideally, if the plan for the year, these things will be shared out, but if they've been balanced against, who knows, an Ofsted visit, some unknown safeguarding concerns, a number of parental concerns, governors' meetings, reports, school improvement visits, budget setting, all really important stuff. But if it all suddenly starts to fill into the same part of the diary and puts excessive pressure upon the leadership, maybe we need to be there and recognise that, you know what, actually, maybe we can do the governors' meeting in a couple of weeks. Actually, the SIP can come back next month. Will all be lost is the question that I'm asking in the short term if we progress with a timetable which, for one reason or another, has become congested and so on and so forth. I would advocate that possibly not. I don't think we can put things off forever. I don't appreciate that point in time. But is there a possibility there is times? And again, do our head teachers feel confident enough to speak to us at these times when they're feeling this pressure, so that we can minimize it, so that we can support them for a period of time in reducing some of the pressures, so they can get through the additional pressures that they didn't see coming. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Oh, sorry, there was one important bullet point for this particular emails and messaging. Communication is key for any school, any organisation. But do you have a policy on it? Schools will email between staff. A lot of them use WhatsApp between staff. Governors may have WhatsApp set up. There'll be text messages, phone calls. If we're not careful, if left unchecked, it does become a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week continual pressure. I myself have had leaders, direct line managers, whose favourite time of working was Sunday morning. It suited them really well. That was great. I'm not against a bit of Sunday working myself in terms of my own personal preferences. However, I knew that at a particular time, at about 10:30 on a Sunday morning, every morning, I'd get 6 or 7 emails from my immediate senior leader. Some of them even said on them, I'm not expecting you to read this, David. I know it's a Sunday. I'm not expecting you to do anything about this until tomorrow when you're back at work. But just the fact that those emails, I knew they were coming, and sure enough, they arrived. The phone in my pocket would ping. Now, that's my fault because I didn't turn the notifications off. But if we leave them on, the phone will ping. My computer, if it was left plugged in charging, it'd ping as well. So it'd actually ping twice for every one of those 6 emails. I'm getting 12 pings on a Sunday morning when I should be choosing whether I access stuff or not, but it's coming through all the time. Maybe that's a bit of an extreme, but I think unless we encourage head teachers to turn the phones off, they'll leave them on all night. They might be tempted to text or message somebody about a work issue they've just thought of. Oh, I'll message them before I forget. But it pervades into the non-working time and takes away the choice for people to have non-working time at a time that suits them. So whether there's certainly very, very simple strategies, Schedule send is now my favourite button. I don't send stuff at the weekends at all, even if I choose to work at that point in time. Some people might say, oh, it means I get a load of emails from David at 8 o'clock on a Monday. But actually, if someone's at work at 8 o'clock on a Monday, they can then start to plan those activities in over their week to respond to them appropriately. Much better that they get it then from my perspective than through the weekend. And again, this is a viewpoint that was shared with me by quite a number of head teachers. But it's probably the more confident ones who are able to, or maybe more experienced, I don't know, or combination, who say, I am going to turn it off. And I think as chairs and vice chairs, if you can support them in strategies that take away some of the email messaging pressure, then I think you will support them in their non-work time. And they come back to it. We've all received the email, or even worse, checked our emails before we went to bed, and then not been able to sleep because of the message that was sent to us. And we're either thinking about a good solution to it or whatever it is, but actually, I'm just losing my sleep. I'm not actually progressing the program any more than I would do if I read it at 8 o'clock the next morning. Last slide, and then hopefully some questions or some viewpoints. Almost all the head teachers said that their biggest support is partnership working. So many of them were talking about their geographical partnership. Some of them were talking about just fellow trusted colleagues that they knew well. Some of them were talking about in partnership with their governing bodies. Some of them were academies, and they talked about their trust as a whole and the other schools within their MAT. But partnership working, I'm stuck with X, Y, or Z. Anybody got any ideas? Somebody coming back to them, hopefully within working hours, with an email that said, oh, here's our policy on that. Do you want to have a look? Rip it off if you want. Oh, fantastic. You've just saved me a Sunday afternoon of scrolling the internet to find something to fit into a policy and so on and so forth. They might have looked at stuff and it not worked, and that's fine again. But partnership working shone through time and time again at multiple points in my sort of interviews with these head teachers. And so if there is anything that you can do to strengthen that, or to speak to your head teacher about who their partners are, and it could be obvious and it's the local partnership, or it might not be. Some of them said, oh, I met some people a couple of months ago at the head teacher induction briefing, and the three of us talk to each other all the time now, because we're all stuck on the same things. And we're confident to talk to those people. And that's another thing, is not just giving yourself permission, but head teachers don't necessarily need to know all the answers all the time. But if they've got a network of people that can help them find the answers, then all the better in terms of their own workload and their well-being as well, in terms of feeling like they're doing a good job. Last bullet point, and it was the something again that came right across the board from all the head teachers, is about their need for support and sometimes how they struggle to ask for it. So again, the more that chairs of governors in particular, but all of us, council officers, absolutely can try and recognise, or just even when we don't recognise anything, offer support, offer help, offer time, offer a listening ear, all of those sorts of aspects. Offer strategies, offer links to other things. I think it is needed under the current workload that school leaders are under, and also will be hugely welcomed. We, as a local authority, we've funded the Heads Up for Head Teachers programme. Hopefully you've heard of it before. I think we're on our third or fourth cohort of head teachers going through that. I don't know the details of exactly what happens on those, because they are independent. It's an independent organisation. The head teachers join it, and it's peer support to all intents and purposes. I've got no idea what's discussed there, but I do know head teachers that have said to me, lifesaver sort of comments. You know, that they've picked up bits and pieces, probably some of the things we're talking about today, but no doubt a host of other things from other head teachers in similar positions to them, or maybe different situations to them, but who can share a bit of understanding and a bit of knowledge. I've whizzed through some of those bullet points. I've got a full briefing, which is a document, and it will be posted on the e-Courier before the end of this week. We've also got a little video with a bit of an introduction for it as well. So if you could ask your head teachers to look out for it, that would be good. They'll get the eCourier update anyway, and most do study the eCourier, which is great. But hopefully a 2-minute listen and a 5-minute read will get them through some of these bullet points. I think the punchline remains that though none of them necessarily are rocket science on their own, the heads that were most successful were those who managed to be rigorous with themselves and stick to it. And I think those that stuck to it, or stuck to some of the strategies over a longer period of time, saw the incremental gains over time. It's not a silver bullet. Saw the incremental gains. And also those that stuck with it, I think, probably had great support from their chairs of governors and from other staff members around them, and the local authority as well, and the SIP, who gave them the confidence to take on some of these strategies, stick with them, and not feel that they were letting anyone down by finishing everything on time straight away before schedule and so on and so forth, which again is unrealistic in terms of doing well and staying well and keeping your school running in the right direction. Okay, I'll stop sharing and I'm open to any questions. Stop sharing seems to have disappeared from my options box, so we'll have to look at the slide at the minute. If anyone's got any questions, well, I'm still trying to find the right one.
Susan, I can see you politely put your hand up there. So well done. Oh, well done, David. Thank you. Susan, do you want to go with your question there?
Yeah, it's not really a question. It's more of a comment, David, as you can imagine, and won't be surprised. It's around the safeguarding and the stresses around that, and what has been identified in the safeguarding visits and inspections that I've done is one of the greatest stresses comes externally, and it's from information not being shared with the schools. So actually there isn't an issue in the school or in the schools that information shared. So when we're talking about reducing stress on head teachers, some of the things that probably would help are external to the school itself. And I would just make a slight comment, although I sort of get it. Governors do play a role in development, but governors are volunteers, they're lay people, they're not paid staff. So governors will not step in and fill a gap created by lack of funding, lack of staffing, lack of resources, whatever. We're added value, not instead of.
I completely agree, Susan. And so if I've misled slightly or led to a misread there, you are absolutely added value and so on and so forth. And so some of the added value, I mean, a lot of governors, for example, bring a lot of possibly health and safety expertise if that's their professional background, or financial expertise if that's their background, or just their general demeanor there. And in almost supporting the head teacher in whatever development it is, to say that you're on it, you've completed that task, it's a job well done, you can stop redoing it or being concerned about it, but giving them the confidence to know, brilliant, budget's well done for this term, everybody's up to speed, we're there with it, could be a supporting role. So that's what I mean by in terms of folk stepping up, the named governor paying an interest and being able to say, you've done enough, stop, at a certain time. The safeguarding one, completely agree. And the tricky solution to it is that policy is appropriate and well planned beforehand, and local authority and external partners all have a part to play in ensuring that our policy and practice is good enough, and the supportive of the school. So for any chair here, if there are any aspects of a safeguarding practice, or to be honest, any other bit of practice, either from local authority officers or from other agencies, from it could be our social care colleagues or our health colleagues, that you feel has been has made it harder for schools not easier, then please david.street@northumberland.gov.uk, send me the specific. You don't have to name names necessarily or so on, but you can if you want as well. That's not a problem either. But send me the specific, and then obviously I can work with teams or with our partners to challenge the actions. And if the actions are around a poor policy we've got or a poor strategy we've got, then we'll change the policy or change the strategy. We're at the service of schools, not the opposite.
Thanks, Susan, for that. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to raise or ask while we've got David with us? No. You must have made that very clear, David. Thank you.
I'm sure there's lots of wording cards. People can come back to me individually. It's not a problem. I think Susan might have asked the question because she was my chair of governors once, so that was quite nice. Good to see you, Susan, as ever.
Thank you, David. Thanks for that input. So we'll move on. I'll hand over to Dave Cookson, who's the head of school improvement, for him to share some thoughts with you now. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Damien. Evening, everybody. Good to see you all. I hope you've all had a pleasant summer and the term started well. If I just start off with some good news, we had another Ofsted report published today from an inspection that took place in the summer term. So we are now up to 93.9% good or outstanding schools in Northumberland, which is the highest it's ever been, and is great news. Great news for the young people in particular, but obviously, you know, a real pat on the back for yourselves for all the support that you give to Northumberland schools, and obviously for our school leaders who've worked so hard to help us get there. The national average is about 89%, so we are doing better than the national, and there are 10 schools left out of 163 that have been inspected that aren't good. So that's great. That's a really positive start of the term, and thank you for your help in getting us to that position. My job tonight is to talk about Northumberland Education School Alliances. I'm going to share a presentation with you. This builds in part on what David's been talking about in terms of workload and so on. Can you all see that? Yep, okay. So if I just give you a bit of background, you may well remember that the white paper produced by the government a few years back mentioned in there that all schools are going to be academies by 2030, amongst other things. That white paper is now in the bin, and a lot of the things that the DfE wanted to do are not going to take place. There are a number that they would still like to take place, for example, extending the length of the school day to at least 32.5 hours in a week. But the expectation that all schools become academies by 2030 is not now written down anywhere. It is still something the DfE would like to do, but there is no expectation or compulsion that schools need to become academies by that particular date. That's not to say that academisation won't continue, and we've seen a slight increase in rates of academisation last year, partly because of schools and governors deciding that they were going to jump before they were ultimately pushed. But that ultimate push isn't necessarily there anymore. After the white paper went in the bin, the DfE suggested that local authorities might be able to set up their own multi-academy trusts. So David and Audrey did a lot of work, put a lot of time in producing a paper and an application to the DfE, as did other local authorities, for them all to be rejected. And local authorities told that no, local authorities weren't going to be able to set up multi-academy trusts. So as a bit of a hybrid of the two, and after talking to a number of school leaders, including those in academies, we've come up with the idea of school alliances. This is trying to bring the benefits of multi-academy trusts to schools that don't necessarily want to be in a multi-academy trust at the moment. And we have spent quite a lot of time talking to all sorts of stakeholders to try and get to a position where we think we've got a model that might work. Let me say from the outset that this isn't finished at all, nor has it been shared widely with school leaders. That will take place next week. We have senior leader briefings in Morpeth and Hexham and Belford next week, and I'll deliver this presentation during that next week. So you're getting a bit of a sneak preview, and the hope is that when your head teachers come back to you and talk to you about it, you've got a bit of information in advance, so they don't have to explain it all to you from the word go. So the idea is that any non-academy school in Northumberland, including those within the Church of England diocese, can join in. And the plan is that we will group schools. We don't quite know how yet, whether it's going to be geographic, whether it's going to be by phase, and they will work more closely together to support themselves, their own pupils and staff, and those in other Alliance schools, just as you would in a multi-academy trust. There is that expectation that there is a bit more work across the group rather than just the individual school. There's lots of examples already where schools in Northumberland do this really, really well, and it benefits the school. It can reduce workload. It can reduce the pressure on the head and the senior leaders. It can reduce the pressure on the teachers and lead to better outcomes. And the idea is that we're going to try and build on that particular idea. We're going to carry on talking to school leaders and people like yourselves all the way up until Christmas. We're going to ask schools who are interested to sign up after Christmas. We're going to have some kind of launch round about June, and we'll keep tinkering with the idea and the thoughts and the processes up until that point. So as I say, absolutely nothing is set in stone for the time being. The idea behind it all is that there's a bit of a dividend. When schools get together, they are stronger than just the sum of the parts. There is something extra that comes from being able to work much more closely together. And we see that in some multi-academy trusts. And that's what we're trying to replicate across those schools that want to join us in Northumberland. So there's some aspects of what goes on in school that can be standardized, that happen across every single school, and every head is dealing with the same thing. And we, that's the school improvement team and people at the local authority, can help do that more efficiently and reduce some of the things that school leaders have to do. There are areas of school life that should still be left with school, that we empower schools to do. So the things that they can do really well, and I'll show you a list in a second. And then probably the bit that's missing at the moment is the collaboration between schools. And that's where multi-academy trusts feel that they have something quite strong. In a multi-academy trust, you'd be expected to collaborate. We're trying to guide schools towards collaboration or greater levels of collaboration, so that that expertise, that development of practice can take place across different groups of staff, be it subjects, be it specific roles in school. So the kinds of things that we're talking about, the kinds of things that we can help standardize, might be around curriculum and syllabus and assessment and data analysis. We do a lot of the quality assurance anyway, so that's already there. Some stuff around safeguarding, bits and pieces around SEND, which again we're doing as it happens. The empowerment bit, and this is really important, are the bits that we would leave to the schools. We're not going to start telling you what to teach or how to teach. We're going to help you find what might work better in your schools, but we're not going to be starting to impose ways of teaching in your particular schools. We're not going to be imposing behaviour systems in your schools, because schools and school leaders are best placed to decide what is most appropriate for their particular cohorts. So they're the things that we will leave to schools. What we hope will come from the collaboration is the implementation of those things that are going really well in different schools, trying to get the good ideas from individual schools across greater groups of schools and using the expertise that already exists in schools to help. Your RE teachers in some of your schools may not be specialists, but getting those RE teachers together to plan together, to look at assessment, to think about how they can do things better is surely going to be helpful to them. And that doesn't happen necessarily to the same extent as we would like it to at the moment. And that goes for every subject. Safeguarding leads may well meet a bit more regularly, but can we do that a bit more effectively? Can we get other groups, PE staff, to work together that a little bit more than they maybe do? So it's that kind of thing that we think we can help schools do. You might be sitting there thinking, well, we've already got school partnerships, and that's absolutely true. But partnerships themselves have become a little more fractured as academy chains have moved in, and they're in some partnerships, there is slightly less engagement from some schools than we would like. So we're not trying to replace partnerships, but we may well be looking at partnerships concentrating on something really specific, for example, transition, because that is a really useful way of partnerships meeting and work being carried out. So the kind of benefits that we're looking at, and this might all sound absolutely fantastic, and what are the pitfalls? We'll talk about those in a while. Consistency. One thing we hear from school leaders is that they want to have consistency from the groups that they work with, in particular from the local authority. So knowing the people that you need to talk to. We have examples where schools can only get in contact with a certain service through a generic mailbox or a particular phone number. They don't know who's going to answer the phone. They don't know who's going to pick up their query. So having those relationships with a specific person or number of people is something that we're working in the background with all the different teams that provide service level agreements. We will continue to provide the leadership support as we do from the Central School Improvement Team at the moment, but we're going to expand that to include school business management support. Again, an area that we haven't really focused on in previous years, and an area that we think we can add value and help schools improve the quality of systems and ultimately be more efficient in the spending of the dwindling amount of money that schools seem to get. We'll probably look at changing the school improvement partners so that they are alliance based. So for example, Damien would become a school improvement partner for a particular group of schools. Again, so you build up that relationship and he's got the knowledge across the schools to help the different groups work together a bit more appropriately. Increase the levels of CPD that's available because we can have greater numbers of people and that can bring economies of scale. But again, all of these things, the areas which the schools feel they need to strengthen would come from the schools. This is not us telling you what to do. This is us helping you work more closely together for the benefit of each school and the alliance in total. We may be able to start to think about shared specialist staff, something that partnerships have talked about before. But if you've got a group of schools together and 3 or 4 of them are struggling to fulfill the music curriculum, it may well be that we can start to look at shared staff, either employed across the alliance or potentially employed within the local authority and paid for by the schools. You know, we may well be able to do things like that have been talked about in partnerships, but have never really taken off. But again, that's the kind of thing you'll find in a multi-academy trust they can do. I'm not sure if there's any reason why we can't do something similar. So there's lots of potential benefits. What we're not going to do is we're not going to change the governance at all. We are not going to top slice school budgets. We're not going to force schools to join us, and we are not going to force schools to stay in if they join and then decide that they don't necessarily like it. We're not going to change our identity. All we want to do is work from the centre to try and improve the collaboration between schools, because we think that is something that can be really, really powerful. So what we'd expect is buy-in, and by buy-in we mean a commitment to really try and take part and make this work. We may have to do things like standardized training days, because they're the days which we can get groups of staff together to do the kind of developmental work that's going to help teaching and learning and outcomes in the classroom. We would hope that the first port of call, if you've got 3 TAs off, we did have one school today that had 9 teaching assistants off, and the first thing they did was to email a group of schools around them to say, can somebody please help me out? Now, whether they did or didn't, I don't know, but we would hope that if another school in your alliance is struggling, you would be there to help them out, if, of course, you've got the capacity to do that in your school. To help facilitate things, to help support across different schools. So although you're still focusing on your own school and yourselves, you've got that commitment to the other schools in your alliance. Just like in a multi-academy trust, you would be expected to do that kind of thing. So as I say, the timeline is set out there. We're still consulting. None of this is set in stone. This is just the ideas and the point in time that we've got to by talking to a number of school leaders and talking to the SLA providers within the council. We hope to have something a bit more structured by December. We'll get the sign up in the early part of next year, and we'll start things off in June after SATs, because we do expect that a lot of these schools will be first and primary schools joining us, of course, because there are most of those in the local authority after SATs. So we get things right and ready at the end of the summer term, so that come September we can start things off properly and start things off nice and quickly. There is going to be a brochure, and I'm going to put the brochure on the website next week, because as I say, I haven't talked to school leaders about this, but there will be a full brochure, basically what you've seen tonight in brochure format, on the Northumberland Education website. That will be the page. It will be at the bottom of that page. That will be there from next week. But the idea of presenting to you tonight is just to give you a bit of a heads up. And if your head teachers do talk to you about this in coming weeks, then you've got a bit of an idea of what we're talking about. So that's the plan. You obviously are part of the consultation, so any thoughts, ideas, you're very welcome to share them now or get in touch with me over the next few days or weeks. Pitfalls you might see, things that we haven't thought of, how it might look from a governor's point of view, any questions at all would be gratefully received. And if you want myself or one of the team to come and talk to governors, I'm happy to do that. We're happy to do that, to come out and basically do the presentation and talk to you specifically about what it might mean for your school. Every time I do this presentation, it sounds fantastic and it sounds like there's no pitfalls. I'm sure there are. Maybe I'm just, I've got my rose tinted spectacles on, but I can see this being a real way of improving things that are already very good. And that's why I started my bit this evening by talking about how great the Ofsted outcomes in particular are. But we will see, we have seen, and we can see in the data that there are areas of practice that need to be improved across Northumberland. We definitely have the ability and the skills and the experience within the county already to make those improvements. And this is a way of trying to get those people together, to work closely together to make those improvements actually happen. So if there's any questions now, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, do feel free to get in touch with me, just dave.cookson@northumberland.gov.uk. And as I say, there's an open offer to any school for us to come and talk to governors or school leaders, or a combination of both, at any point between now and early next year.
Thank you, Dave.
No problem.
Silence.
Well, either
It
it's a
certainly
really,
is.
it's either a
If I can
really
just
good
follow on
idea,
from-
or people are sitting there thinking that ain't going to work at all, Dave.
Well, if I can just follow on from Dave, actually, we in the school improvement team are very, very excited about the possibilities and the options to come, and just thinking about how things can evolve and develop even further from what we already do. So it's certainly very exciting times and lots of exciting things to think of. So as Dave said, if you've got any other questions for him, please do forward them.
This isn't us trying to say to schools don't become academies, because we will always have the line that if academisation is the best thing for your school, then that's what you should do. But what we're trying to do is bring the benefits for those schools that really don't want to, so that they can reap the reward of working more closely with others that other schools are currently having, but you may not be in a position to want to academise now. So it's absolutely not a plea for everybody to stay with the local authority at all. We're just trying to help, that's our job. Our job is to help schools get better, and this is a different way in which we think we can do exactly that.
And I think it was almost as if the two of you planned those to follow on from the other, because the whole concept of workload and well-being and support for each other, which David, you had in your slides as well, just sits so neatly within the proposal that Dave's just shared with you. So I don't know whether you did plan that, the two of you, but it worked very well. Okay, well, thank you both very much for that. And if you have got any questions, do please forward them. So we're going to move on now to the autumn terms agenda for your full governing body meetings. And I'm delighted that Margaret Arksey, one of our team, is going to run through the agenda with you. So I'll hand over to you, Margaret. Thank you. Oh, sorry, is there something there in the chat? Just missed that.
Fine, there's a question, Damien. I'm just typing an answer to it.
Okay,
now.
all right. Thanks, Dave. Thank you. Sorry, Margaret, to interrupt you there. I'll be quiet now, I promise.
It's okay. I'll just share my screen here. Share. Can everybody see that?
Yes,
they
thanks,
can.
Margaret. Yeah, thank you.
Right, that's fine. I mean, obviously the agenda's got the same format. We'll put your school logo on the top with the Northumberland Education, the meeting date and time, and there's always the option, as always, to have a virtual meeting or in the school. We'll continue to put who's invited, the category of governor and the start and end date, which I think is very useful, because although it would tell you when people's end dates are going to be, it's usually a useful visual for you to see how long you've got to go before terms of office end. And we usually put the quorum number on as well. Opening prayers obviously kept on for our Church of England schools. Now, being the autumn term, it's normally when we do election of chair and vice chair. So that's on. I mean, obviously, if your school's out of sync with that, you know, your school governance officer will sort that on for you. Normal apologies for absence, and then obviously I've talked about the membership, but we talk about the membership update. So if there's any reappointments where terms of office or you've got any vacancies, you can consider that as a governing board to see how you want to take that forward. There's your declaration of personal pecuniary interest in this agenda. You obviously did the annual one in the summer term. Now we'd attach the minutes and action grid of the summer term meeting next. And then at point 7, we would normally ask if you've got any minutes of committee meetings that you've had, if you let us have them in advance, and we'd put them on here and send them out to your governors. Annual review of committee membership, again, that's if appropriate. We recommend you always do that every year. So again, it might be that you might have already done it, but we'll keep it on so you could possibly look, or if you've had new governors who've been appointed in the summer term, you might want to have a look at that again and review. Head teachers report. Obviously, that's the main focus of your agenda, and we've just put a couple of things down, just school development plan, SEF and the SIP report, and they can be attached by the head teacher as appropriate or gone through at the meeting. And we'll obviously liaise with the head teacher to get any reports sent out to you before the meeting, or if not, we'll arrange for them to be sent out separately. Safeguarding update, the usual one is the Keeping Children Safe in Education. A table of substantive changes for September 23. We've put a link to that for page 177. And again, it's recommended that you do as governors training and on this on an annual basis, and that everybody who's a governor needs to read this. I mean, I know you're all used to this now because it's not a new thing. Budget update, very important. You would have a budget report in writing or usually sometimes verbal. I mean, it's that kind of midpoint in the budget where the budget started in April, you've had the summer term. So sometimes at this time of year, there isn't always a lot to report, but obviously we will remind you that, you know, the indicative budget is normally done this time in this term by your contact in accountancy. School's financial value statement, again, this is done every autumn term, and somebody from audit will be in contact, and the deadline for this is normally always the 31st of December. School voluntary account, another one if appropriate. Again, we do recommend these are done every year, and so it's just a case of if your school's got them, attach them. Sorry, that's the dog barking. He's obviously seen something. Toby, no. Right, Governor Code of Conduct. Again, we want people to sign up annually to this. We will attach it, and if you could all just verbally say you're going to, you know, adhere to the Code of Conduct. This is very important because it's good that governors all understand your role and about really how you conduct yourself in a governing body. Now, item 16, this is a one for federations and foundation schools only, and obviously voluntary aided schools, church schools. So school admissions arrangements, again, it's something we're putting in the autumn term. So I would delete that if you're not a church school or a federation or a foundation school. Part of our role, as you know, is GDPR. So we did send out the annual GDPR report in the summer term. So we'll just be putting that forward for you to look at to see if you've had any breaches. A lot of the schools are usually very minor. So we would present that report. We do normally at this time of year or the spring do an environmental visit to the school. And again, this is if it's due. So if it is due, we'll probably arrange with the head teacher to come in before the meeting to do a quick look around, check that everything's okay environmentally in the school. Urgent business, again, has to be with approval of the chair. Now, something that we've put on this time is something that you might want to reflect on the impact of the meeting on the outcomes for children. It's just something that, as a governor, you might think you attend the meeting, but it really needs to come round to what are you doing to improve the outcomes for the children. So a lot of my schools, it's just really go around the table, a one line, how you feel, what you've seen in school, what the head teacher's told you in the report, maybe you've done a visit, health and safety, how you think that impacts on the outcomes of the children. So again, that can be left on or kept on as you see fit. Now, the dates of the future meetings, you'll have hopefully had the full year, academic year one in the summer term. So we're just going to remind you again of the spring and the summer term. As usual, at the bottom, there's the further information, which again has the northumberlandeducation.gov.uk governors, and that is the link that'll take you straight to the page that has everything on that we talked about today. And then there's the usual last page, which is any part 2 items, which is not for publication. Okay, I don't know if everybody's got any questions on that.
Thank you, Margaret, very much for running through that for everybody. Did anybody have any questions for Margaret, or indeed any other members of the team who have kindly joined us tonight? And actually, is any members of the team that wanted to add anything to anything that Margaret's said there about the agenda? No. No,
Damien.
I can see Karen shaking her head and Louise there. Thank you both.
Definitely not.
You mustn't have missed anything out, Margaret. Well done. Thank you very much for doing that. Just one additional update just to share with you, and it's really only applicable if you've got a new head teacher in your school this year, but it might be something to bear in mind if you have a new head teacher in the future. Jane Kennedy, who many of you will know, she is another member of our school improvement team, and one of her roles is supporting and organising the induction of new head teachers to schools in Northumberland. And last year she's worked on a document, producing a document detailing all the useful pieces of information, documents, the whereabouts of those documents, getting all of that information from the departing head teacher to make sure that that list really is left in place for any new head teacher to have access to on arrival. And that includes activities and documents concerning governance. So if you have got a new head teacher in your school this year and you would like to have access to that document that Jane has worked on, if you either get in touch with me or get in touch with Jane Kennedy herself, her email address is like the rest of our addresses, her name at northumberland.gov.uk, because I know certainly when I became a head teacher, it would have been very useful to have a list to work my way through. It was the first session today of the new head teachers induction, and one of them quite rightly pointed out, I don't know what I don't know. And I think when you're new to the role, actually having something you can work through, and I think for chairs and vice chairs of governors, that would be equally useful in supporting a new head teacher in your school. So that was just an update, an additional piece of information from school improvement. So that was the agenda that we had for you this evening. While we've got members of the team here, the governance team, is there anything else anybody would like to raise or ask, or indeed use any of the email addresses you've been given tonight if you want to put anything specific to your school? But was there anything else anybody wanted to have from us this evening?
I think we did mention that there has been an issue in the past about school governor emails, and
Thank you, Margaret.
for chairs and vice chairs, if
Thank you.
I would advise the school to use either the school email or give you a school email personally, so your personal email isn't sent out to parents or anybody who has a query. So if you are using a personal email, I would advise that you use a school email in future. Again, it's down to
Thank you, Margaret.
preference, but I
Yeah,
think
it's-
it's good practice, I think,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
use the school email.
Thank you, Margaret, for remembering that. Yeah. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to ask from us? I can't see any hands. Okay, well, thank you very much for attending, or for viewing this later, if you are viewing it later. I know that the schools and the governance team, the people who are here, we're really grateful for the voluntary hours that you do spend supporting and challenging our schools across Northumberland. So thank you very much for being here tonight, and we really hope that this term and the academic year goes well for you all. A bit of a plea as well, we are always looking for additional governors, so if you do know anybody that would be, that you think, they might not think they're good for the role, but if you think they'd be good for the role, if you could point them in our direction and let us know, because we're always looking for additional governors in the schools. Oh, we have got something up there. I was just waiting for somebody to join. So yes, if you know of anybody, please do let us know. But what I will do is just thank you all very much for coming tonight. Big thanks to Donna Donaldson, who supports us admin wise with our team, for getting tonight organised and getting all your invitations out, and for you all being here. So what I will do is I'll just leave you to the rest of your evening and wish you and all your schools all the very best for the autumn term. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Okay, I'll stop the recording now.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. Okay.